Hello, gentlemen, and welcome to another Palavi Market Research video. Today, we're going to be discussing a memo titled Ruminating on Asset Allocation. This is a memo written by Howard Marks. Howard is the current leader of Oak Tree Capital Management. We've actually talked about him in the past when he was initially describing these ideas, but fortunately for us, he actually went ahead and really broke this down very clearly in this memo. So if you want to find it yourself, you can look up Oak Tree in the title of this memo. But I'm going to be, in this video, walking you through all the concepts that he breaks down here and kind of hand-holding you as to what he means and simplifying it a little bit further, okay? And if we want to understand why we're listening to Howard, well, Howard manages a firm that currently manages $172 billion worth of capital. He is a person who anyone who's interested in credit and is a portfolio manager in credit and debt investing, they are looking to Howard as to how he is allocating his portfolio, especially in the private markets. And at the end of the video, I'm actually going to walk you through his 13F, which is basically a $5 billion fund or so that he has in equities. And we're going to see what equities are in that. So if you stick around to the end, we're actually going to be able to see what Howard is investing in currently in the public markets, even though you could argue he is one of the premier private credit investors in the world. And the majority of his portfolios of that $172 billion is dedicated in that niche. So let's get into it. According to Marx, there is currently a sea change taking place between interest rates and therefore the role of credit in portfolios. So interest rates are changing at the Federal Reserve level, and that is changing the role of credit in your portfolio, or at least that's Marx's argument. And he offers us, in this piece that we're walking through, a new way to combine old ideas into a unified theory. So, this first section is titled Asset Classes. And he breaks this down because asset allocation and even like the theory and like the ideas behind asset allocation is a relatively new thing. And he said that when he first joined the industry 55 years ago, no one really used that phrase at all. And he says structuring portfolios was a simple following the classic 60-40 split. So a 60-40 split between stocks and bonds. And that was the classical way that people constructed their portfolios. But today, asset allocators spend a huge amount of their time answering these questions. How many equities and how much in debt? How much capital in stocks and bonds and how much in alternatives? This is the real list of questions that portfolio managers today spend an overwhelming amount of their time, their cognitive time, and their team's cognitive time thinking about. But it's a little bit too much to think about, and it's kind of missing the point. And that's what Marx leads us to thinking about, right? He says many investors use computer models to help with these decisions, but the models require inputs regarding expected return, risk, and correlation, and are therefore kind of speculation. And most of these are based on history and thus are questionable. Because so many of these models, these mathematical models even, are based on historical events with extremely different, fundamental principles that are affecting the marketplace itself, interest rates, Q1 money supply, globalization, all these things, and trade volumes. It's so hard to use historical data and to project future returns, especially in the context of credit investments, okay? So the correlation between asset classes is particularly difficult to predict, even with or especially with mathematical models, because again, everyone is so interested in finding assets that are not correlated, but measuring the correlation between assets is actually a very opaque and difficult thing to do. And these mathematical models make it look like you're achieving an understanding in what assets are correlated with the other, but it's really, a lot of, smoke and mirrors. Okay, so for the past 2 years, Marx has made a case that there is increased utility in credit investments. So what is the difference between credit investments and equities? In order to understand what Marx is saying about why there is better utility in credit investments today than there was, say, in 2014, for example, we need to understand the difference. And so for the purposes of this discussion, there are only two types of asset classes: ownership and debt. And if someone wants to participate financially in a business, that is the only two ways you can actually participate in a business in financial terms. You either own a part of it or you make a loan to it. Ownership and lending actually have nothing in common at all. Nothing in common. So owners put their money at risk with no promise of return. They acquire a piece of a business or other assets and are therefore entitled to a proportional share of the business. So if there's increased profit or cash flow or the potential for it in the future that the market seems to agree on, the business will have increased enterprise value. And owners benefit fundamentally when there is increased enterprise value. All right. Lenders, however, provide funds to help owners purchase or operate their businesses or other assets in exchange for a promised periodic interest payment and the remaining payment of the principal at hand. So the repayment of a principal at the end, because when you are making a loan, you have a principal amount that you are lending, and then you receive interest on top of that principal, right? But it doesn't contribute to the principal because paying your interest payments only contributes to the interest. But in order to pay off the loan, you have to pay off the principal, and the principal is the principal amount, and the principal amount is what is actually being charged in interest on. So the relationship between borrowers and lenders is a contract. It's contractual, right? And the resulting return is known in advance. You can calculate your return to when you are lending money in advance. So it's understood. So that brings us to this last point here. It might be helpful to think of lending or debt investing as fixed outcome investing, while owning assets, owning stocks, owning crypto is a variable outcome investment. This is an awesome reframe that Marx is offering us. So when we are thinking about debt investing, this is fixed outcome investing. And when we're thinking about equity investing, this is variable outcome investing. I hope you follow. Now, if we build on top of this further, the ownership of assets, aka owning common stock, whole companies, real estate, private equity, and real assets, and the ownership of debt, bonds, loans, MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and other streams of promised payments should be viewed as entirely different, not variations on a theme. So Marx is really encouraging us to view assets as a 1 and a 0, okay? You are either owning assets or you're owning debt over assets, right? And that those two things are fundamentally different, 1 and 0. They actually do not have any Venn diagram benefits, which is a little bit antithetical to what the conventional wisdom is. And so now Marx is forcing us to come up with a choice. Now that we have this 1 or 0, right? Now that we have this fork in the road, he's forcing us, hey, now we need to understand what our choices are. What are the choices that are available to us? So the essential choice that he tells us that a portfolio manager must make is the selection of a targeted risk posture, meaning you need to define your desired balance between aggressiveness and defensiveness, because the essential decision you are making as an investor is how much emphasis one should put on preserving capital versus growing capital, offense versus defense, preservation versus harvesting, growing, right? So you are either, so say I'm managing money for my mom, and my mom's like, I just want to keep it safe, and I'm not too worried about this, blah blah blah. Like I'm not really into Bitcoin. I just want to have my house in Long Island stay together. Okay, I don't want to lose my fucking house. If that's the person you're managing money for, then you don't really need to be doing all this fancy stuff, right? You just buy some treasuries, you buy some SPY, right? You keep it simple. Versus if you're talking to maybe like your younger brother, he's like, I only want to buy call options on Bitcoin, then you have to know thy audience when you're a portfolio manager. That's your job, right? So again, we're given another fork in the road. Are we dealing with ownership of assets or ownership of debt, or are we dealing with preserving capital or growing capital? So once we understand which of these essential choices we're trying to make, are we preserving or growing, then we can decide what our portfolio is actually comprised of, because a portfolio is a composition. All right. So again, your essential choice, you cannot simultaneously emphasize both defense and offense. This is the fundamental inescapable truth in investing. So that's what we were just talking about. Many people think the proper goal in investing is achieving the highest return. This is such an important point, guys. So many people believe that the highest goal, the highest calling for investing is just to achieve the most money return as possible. But guys, this couldn't be further from the truth. Even the people who are, say, most interested, most risk on, they don't want to see returns past that kind of 33 to 66% APY, or an annual return past that. Because if you say you are that crypto hedge fund manager who's getting hundreds of percents, in return annually for investors, well, you're not going to be able to do that at scale, okay? And institutional investors recognize that. The most risk on guys who manage substantial amounts of money, say over $100 million, they won't even consider for a second trying to pursue any outcome past 60, like the high 60s in percentage terms, because you're going to lose your investors. Because your investors, if they have money and they're investing in a firm, that is managing tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, they couldn't care less about 180, 200% return in a year, because they have no trust that you possess any ability to replicate what you just did, and nor should they. And this is an interesting thing that I've seen just here in Puerto Rico as well, that a lot of these guys, a lot of these super successful fund managers who get these insane returns, especially in the hedge fund industry, they actually struggle to raise more capital because no one really believes that they can do it again, right? So if you see someone who's got 300% return over the last 3 years, it's like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but what makes you think you can do that again? And it doesn't matter how sophisticated of a portfolio manager you are, answering that question to a room full of sophisticated investors is very, very difficult, if not impossible. Because in order to benefit from those returns, you were taking risk that your LPs probably weren't even that comfortable with. So if you come back to your LPs, your limited partners, the investors in your fund, with these types of gains, they actually might be upset with you because they were engaging in a risk profile that they weren't really conscious of. Now, again, wait, this last part. More sophisticated thinkers, more sophisticated portfolio managers understand that the goal is to achieve the best relationship between return and risk. My father and I talk about this a lot, okay? We are constantly trying to find medium risk, high reward opportunities, right? And how do you what's the difference between a medium risk opportunity and with high reward and a high risk opportunity with a high reward is really just your network, your skills, and all these other things. So like if you have a network that can help you take a high risk, high return asset and turn it into a medium risk, high return asset, that is really where real money is made, guys, is you use your skills, your network, your politicking, your money, everything to take high risk, high reward opportunities and lower the risk premium that exists with them through the combination of your skills, network, capital. All right. Now, this is where it gets super interesting. And I think this is where Marx is like completely in a league of its own, because he's able to take these ideas and to visualize them as if we're children, and to help children understand. So if you're a fifth grader, you're going to be able to follow me on the next few slides here, okay? The shapes of curves. So in the low interest rate environment between 2009 and 2021, the expected return from debt, which is shown in the green line here, was extremely low in the absolute and far below the historical return on equities, rendering debt relatively unattractive. What is he saying? In this time period between 2009 and 2021, we had historically low interest rates by the Federal Reserve, correct? It was like literally 0.5%. And so how do lenders, how do, people in the credit world make money? They make money based on the spread of the interest that they can charge and whatever the Federal Reserve's Treasury charge is, right? So if the US Treasury is charging 1%, then you're going to be able to compete as a lender based on some spread between what you are willing to offer and what the government's able to offer. So say that's now 2.5%. But when you're operating at those levels where the spread is only 2.5%, and the spread is only 2.5% and only gets you to say 3 or 2.5, right? Then the risk reward ratio on debt investing, on lending, on credit is too low. So that's why it was not a sexy, and it just didn't have the correct risk reward profile for institutional investors to be interested in credit investing between the years 2009 and 2021. But as you can see here, today this green line moves to the right because the attractiveness of debt is considerably higher than it was. So why is that the case? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to answer this one. In a market with any degree of efficiency or rationality, there's a trade-off. How do you decide when it is better to own assets versus lend to them, right? So a higher expected return with further upside potential at the cost of greater uncertainty, volatility, and downside risk, or a more dependable but lower expected return or a fixed return entails less upside and less downside. So this is how this is typically shown to you in, say, your econ class in college. The relationship between risk and return is represented linearly, but this isn't offering us a complete picture because what this shows us that is incorrect, and this is the important point here, guys, is that as there is more risk, this is showing that there is an increased, it says here, this makes it appear to certain that increased risk will lead to increased returns. And this is obviously not true. What am I saying? Just because something is more risky does not inherently mean that we're going to make more money, right? The spread of opportunity, the spread of potential outcomes is greater as you move rightwards on this chart. So that's what this drawing represents. So I guess Marx in 2006 redrew this concept of the basic linear return risk relationship line chart, whatever you want to call it, and he superimposed these bell curves on top of it. Now, what is this visualizing? This represents the different probability distributions that represent where you are in the chart. So if I'm here, then this is the probability distribution of my investment working out, right? It can go up and down. And obviously on the far right here, the more risk we're taking on, the more potential there is for the return not to just go to zero like it's showing here, but to go past zero to negative, right? So this is when we're shorting assets, things like that, right? And this is visualizing the uncertain nature of returns from risky assets, right? As we move to the right, the spread of probable outcomes expands with it. So that's what I was just saying. Okay. So now we have to choose the offense-defense balance. So this is another way of visualizing a portfolio's composition. Now in black, we have 100% assets, right? 100% equities, say. And then green, we have 100% debt. 100% of my portfolio is lent out to other businesses. And then blue is 66% debt, 33% assets. Red, 33% debt, 66% assets. So you can see how the probability distribution changes as our composition of assets changes as well. And I would agree with Marx that this is a very fair, very effective, I would say, visualization of what he's describing here. And I think that he would be in the case based off of what his portfolio is allocated, when I look at his 13F, when I look at how his portfolio is constructed, I would say he's more of a blue man versus an entirely green one. So what are Marx's concluding thoughts? Well, Marxist, he's not a Marxist, guys, not at all. Fundamentally speaking, the only asset classes are ownership and debt. They differ enormously in terms of their fundamental nature. Ownership assets and debt assets should be combined to get your portfolio to the position on the risk-return continuum that's right for you. No one can tell you what is right for you but you to yourself. This is the most important decision in portfolio management and all of asset allocation more broadly. Other decisions are merely a matter of implementation. They are not really, these are stylistic choices, is another way of putting it. And of course, your asset allocation process will be informed by how you rate your ability to identify and access superior strategies and superior managers, recognizing that doing so isn't so easy. It isn't easy to find great strategists, great managers, but it's easy for you all because look where you are right now, the Palaview Market Research YouTube channel, one of the premier places for all such things in premium wealth creation, education. Have you checked out our newsletter? Have you checked out the opportunities that we're signaling and showing you guys? And if you haven't, you need to join. And if you can't afford it, you need to make money so that you can join. I love you. Now, oh, there's more. There's more concluding thoughts. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. My plug was so premature. I know nothing about what it's like to be premature. Mhm. The prospective returns in this area today are much higher than they were in the 2009 to 2021 period. Massively important point. He is making a great point here that, hey, I wasn't saying this between 2009 and 2021. We had a different economic environment. But today, credit investing, debt investing is where it's at. And these returns in credit investing start at roughly 7% on public credit and 10% on private credit. This is where Oaktree is printing money. These 10%, and I would say that they've got a huge amount of deal flow between 10 and say 14, maybe even 16% that they're yielding on private credit instruments, okay? And what's crazy about that is that, and this is what Oaktree is 100% doing, yielding, say, 15% on your money with billions of dollars, right? And doing it through credit instruments, through instruments that have fixed outcomes, and using leverage using more debt to, fuel that process. That's where Oaktree is just in a league of its own, is doing what I just described right before this next thing I'm about to say. Because loans are contractual in nature. The returns from credit are likely to prove much more dependable and more leverageable than ownership returns, especially in this market. AKA, Marx sees the risk-reward relationship with being a lender to be meaningfully higher than being an owner at this time, October 2024. So let's take a look at Howard Marx's portfolio in the public markets. He owns almost a third of this $5 billion fund is in Torm PLC. It's like a big shipping conglomerate, kind of interesting. Chesapeake Energy Corporation, another one that TJR and I are tracking a good amount of time. Same with Vail in a, that's more of a mining business as well. But yeah, I mean, if you guys aren't familiar, Liberty Global, this is actually my Wi-Fi provider here in Puerto Rico. Another interesting choice. So let me back up because I realize I've never done a video on this. If you have an investor that you're interested in learning about or you are tracking, you can write their name, and if they're a public investor, if they, use other people's money and institutional funds money, then they have something that's called a 13F. So if you look up the portfolio manager's name, like John Paulson, Bill Ackman, Warren Buffett, whoever it is, whoever you like, you can just write their name, 13F, and it will bring you to a page that looks like this, where it shows literally all the stocks that they're investing in. I obviously do this all the time. I would encourage you to do this as well so that you're learning about new companies. Am I interested? Am I impressed with these businesses that Marks is investing in? Honestly, no, not at all. And neither should you. This isn't this. I would be impressed with if I saw their private credit portfolio. That would be impressive, right? But this isn't. These aren't really all that creative choices. Like this royalties, we've pointed you guys to better royalties businesses than this one here with better fundamentals and everything. So, it's okay. It's okay. It's nothing to write to your mom about or whatever the saying goes. You know what I mean? All right, guys. That is today's video. I am working on another documentary. It should be out within the next 72 hours, I hope. But I'm not trying to rush it. I'm trying to do higher quality content for you guys. Man, oh man. Man, oh man, did you learn something today? If you sat through this and you understood the things I was saying, you are smarter, my friend. And I guarantee that. I guarantee that. That is one of my guarantees to you. What new topics do you guys want to hear about? Just kidding. I've got so many topics in the queue right now. I'm not even asking that question right now because there's a lot of important things that we all need to learn about together, okay? Peace and victory, boys. We will discuss more soon, hopefully tomorrow. Bye-bye.